Grace to you and peace from God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Good afternoon, church family. I pray you're all doing well, and I pray you're all staying warm as these first few days of December have been rather cool. So I hope you're staying bundled up. You know, this past Sunday we had our Hanging of the Greens service. And as you can see behind me, the wreaths, the garland, and the Christmas tree are now all in place. We even have a star on the front of the church. Everything looks wonderful. And I want to say a big thank you to all those who worked hard to make this special service a success. We also have another upcoming event that I promised to share a few weeks ago. Now that we have a firm hold on the date and time, I'm ready to announce it today. On December 20th at 3 p.m., we will have an outdoor Christmas program of sorts. Weather permitting, we will have a bonfire, we'll have caroling, and we'll have the young folks come and share their Christmas recitations. We invite all to come out and participate. Now, we will not be serving food or drink, so I encourage you to bring a snack and also bring your lawn chair. You might want to snuggle up to that bonfire. Or you can stay in your vehicle, as we will be using our FM transmitter. Either way, I hope you'll all be able to come out and join us on December 20th, Sunday at 3 p.m. We are in the season of Advent, moving toward the third Sunday of Advent. And many of you are preparing. Many of you have already put out, and some not yet, but are getting ready to put out some Christmas decorations. Now, if your house is like mine, when we begin to pull out the Christmas decorations, with those come memories. We remember past Christmases. We miss those who are no longer with us, but we give thanks to God for the times we've had, for the joy He's given us, and we smile. We also look forward to the joy that we are sure God will bring to us in the future. That's kind of what Psalm 126 talks about. Today's devotional was written by Talitha Arnold, and the reading does come from Psalm 126. And in its two parts, this psalm appears first to recollect of past events, a homecoming or a being brought back. Then it moves forward in hope from a present anxious situation to another gracious act of restoration. Hear these words from Reverend Arnold. For 10 years, the American Southwest experienced a devastating drought. Centuries-old pinyon trees that covered the hills throughout New Mexico became susceptible to bark beetles and died by the thousands. Once green landscapes turned gray with dead trees. For longtime residents, it felt like a death in the family. Then one summer, it rained. Within days, fields of wildflowers sprang up. People couldn't believe their eyes. Every patch of ground was covered with yellow cowpen daisies and purple asters and other flowers not seen in a century. But the rain alone was not the reason for this sea of color. The needles of the dead pinyons provided much of the nutrients needed by long dormant seeds. The trees would never be restored, but their death gave birth to new beauty as far as the eye could see. Those who go out weeping shall come home with shouts of joy. Psalm 126 seems out of place for the third Sunday of Advent. Granted, the psalm does speak of joy, even shouts of joy, but with images of seeds and sowing and sheaves of harvest, it seems better suited for Thanksgiving than Advent. But a closer reading reveals its Advent message. Like watcher tell us of the night, the psalm looks for signs of God's promise in dark and difficult times. It first finds them in the remembrance of things past and the joy and laughter the people knew when God brought them home from exile. And even their neighbors acknowledged God's mighty deeds on their behalf. Their remembrances can resonate with us in Advent, when we often look back at Christmas pasts to recall long ago joys and perhaps better times. Like the psalmist, we can remember when our mouths were filled with laughter, our family was all together, our church was full, our nation was at peace, and the world seemed, if not joyous, at least a better place. But Psalm 126 is not an exercise in nostalgia. The remembrance of things past has a present purpose. Recalling God's deliverance long ago leads directly to the call for God to use that same transforming power now. Verse 4 even asks God to demonstrate greater power than before. Not content with Isaiah's vision of streams in the desert, Psalm 126 wants watercourses in the Negev, a desert whose very name means dry, parched, the hottest place around. Isaiah predicted that sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Psalm 126 proclaims such sadness will be transformed into shouts of joy. Like watercourses, not just springs, the Psalm's word for joy incorporates abundance and power. This word for joy does not just mean rejoicing or gladness, but a loud cry, a proclamation of love, a shout of victory. And this shout of victory echoes 3 times through the short psalm to emphasize this ultimate joy. In promising such joy, the psalm offers an important insight into its nature. There's no jingle bells joy brought with the swipe of a credit card. The seeds of this joy have been planted in sadness and watered in tears. This is an honest joy that often comes only after weeping has tarried the night. Such an understanding of joy is vital in the life of faith, particularly in Advent. For all their celebrations, the weeks leading to Christmas can be a time of sorrow. Sometimes we experience Advent's tears as a personal sadness, remembering a loved one who has died or a relationship that has ended. It can also be a sorrow we share as a nation or as churches, when our preparations for the Prince of Peace make us realize how far we've strayed from that path. Such sorrow can separate us from God, particularly if we confuse Advent's true joy with our culture's teachings about happiness and prosperity. In contrast, Psalm 126 acknowledges the reality of sorrow. It also remembers and points to God's power to transform sorrow into joy. The joy the psalm both remembers and anticipates is a particular kind, namely the joy of the harvest. That could reinforce the argument that the psalm is better for bringing in the sheaves than preparing for the birth of the Messiah, were it not for the fact that for the Hebrews, harvest joy celebrated far more than good crops. When the people of Israel brought their first fruits to the temple, they not only thanked God for the abundance of that particular year, they also gave thanks for God's deliverance in the past. In the ritual commanded in Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 11, they remembered God's faithfulness and transforming power that went all the way back to Abraham, that wandering and childless Aramean of whom God had made a great nation. Their harvest prayer also recalled how God's power had transformed them from Pharaoh's slaves to sowers of their own seed, a free people in a promised land. The natural power of God to turn seeds into grain would be miracle enough, but Psalm 126 makes an even greater statement. The seeds are not ordinary seeds, but seeds of sorrow. The fruit they bear is not grain or wheat, but shouts of joy. This is not the conventional wisdom of you reap what you sow that Paul affirmed in Galatians 6:7. Instead, the image, sow in sorrow, reap in joy, incorporated an ancient Near East belief that weeping or keening while you planted made the crops more productive. By linking that understanding to the celebration of God's deliverance, the psalm changes an agricultural practice into a powerful theological statement. It affirms both God's power and the people's faith. They shall come home with shouts of joy. Thus, the psalm not only calls upon God to use the transforming power, but also calls us to be open to its possibilities. It challenges us to trust God's joy wherever we encounter it. In a stable in Bethlehem, at an empty tomb, or in acres of cowpen daisies and purple asters. So I pray during this season of Advent, you will remember your encounters with God's joy, when your mouth was filled with laughter and your tongue with shouts of joy. And I pray you will continue to seek out new encounters, that you might come home with shouts of joy. May God bless you all during this Advent season.